Alright, walk and talk video, I think. Oh, yeah, looks like it. Anyway, yeah, very whited places here. Anyway, so Piro, as I figured he would, has backtracked or whatever. He's still arguing for this idea of a incremental consciousness that I think is silly. That it somehow comes in little tiny pieces. I think our brain does provide for the opportunity for increments of consciousness, weightiness of consciousness. It can be dulled and it can be sharp. But I don't think that's a manifestation of how many microorganisms are thinking at a particular moment. So he's even going so far to say is that our sub-programs, our subconscious, is itself conscious, which, again, is, I think, nonsense. I'm going to have a real problem finding my path here. So anyway, I have to just follow the stuff. I also want to get to the subject of the I. That's the big one here. This idea that he still talks in terms like he makes choices and he does this and he does that and it's all under control and he can do anything he wants and he can think anything he wants, and I think it's just he's way behind on this subject. I guess he ignored all the hundreds of videos made over the last 6 years on this subject. It's sort of demonstrated and proved. You can look for the Modern Mystic videos. That it's an illusion that there's any such thing as an I in your head. There are your ideas, your concepts, your beliefs, your conceptions, your experience has conformed in you notions, ideas, and those things have a gravity, an affinity for other ideas that are going to be consistent with them. And so you start to become a collective of ideas. And your behavior, most of your personality, is just a conditioned imitation of various things you've seen in the world. And that one just comes out of a bit of, I wouldn't say randomness, but a kind of chaos as a process. It's not as specific or explicit as the consistency of ideas. So if you become, you can become scientifically minded or fantasy minded or religious or all these things. They will oblige your brain to find likewise other ideas that are consistent with those ideas. Incompatible ideas will likely not be able to flourish in your identity. So you will become a Republican or a Democrat or something like that. You will tend, there's a tend to be, as I stated, an affinity, a gravity between certain ideas and a repulsion between certain ideas, and that defines the programs running in your head. I've used this analogy a lot of times, but for me personally, there was little things, Moby Dick, Dickens, these stories that gave me an appreciation for the welfare of others. This idea of seeing the world as if you can't just extract what you want out of it. There's a consequence for your interaction with it. And there's and so that became a theme. And that theme gravitated to other philosophical concepts of social engineering or consequentialism and all this kind of stuff. And that's just the way that snowball rolled that created who I became, because that became my logical process. and I don't have any control over those attachments and gravities. I don't have any control over acquiring those sensitivities, that ability to question my own motives. The fact that would become almost instinctive, where the first thing I would say is, what's my cut? And as soon as they say, what's my cut, show me the money, as soon as I hear my brain say that, I say, well, is this a circumstance where you can afford to be a selfish asshole? Or is this a circumstance where you got to do better than that? Tree of death here. Made it. Held up my hand in case, I could hold the tree up, right? Not likely. Oh, hell. This is too much for me. Yeah. Too much. So there's this idea that we are a thing. No, we're just ideas, a collection of ideas, a collection of themes, principles, notions, ideals. You can give them lots of words, but it all comes down to the same thing, is that they have their own continuity, and it's a collective. And as stated, most people, if they have any kind of depth to their thinking process, well, if they know anything about logic and how, they'll recognize inconsistencies and do something about fixing them. Realize that they have to figure out why it doesn't sound right when they say a certain thing, or when they believe a certain thing, and they'll try to fix that not rightness. Their brain will. See, they will. We have these words that are just so prejudicial to understanding ourselves as the truth. And I use the phrase me brain as a replacement for I, because I think that's the truth of it. It's my brain that does things. It says things. That responds to the world. I am just the byproduct of me brain's processing. It subconsciously is creating all of it. I have no control because I don't exist. My brain exists. And Hero's ignoring that fact. So, getting back, winding it backward, he's continuing, again, like I said, to argue as if there's the nature of awareness or consciousness, of feeling, is somehow a generic function, as if it's built into matter itself, and that it's not something manifested exclusively in machines, brains, capable of creating it. I think the proof here, the evidence, is overwhelming if you take the time to analyze it. You can see it in your own, in the function of your own brain. The fact that consciousness or awareness is the highest order function, that you can change your focus, that your consciousness is realized through your senses. It doesn't come in through your senses. Your consciousness seeks out the world. It's not the other way around. And it's only, when the other parts demand attention through subconscious programming that you're aware of them. The reflexes, and that's when you're aware that something is in front of your eye. If your eye didn't react, your consciousness wouldn't become aware. It's the physical sensations that come into the conscious zone as a byproduct of the process. So, that's sort of an obscure point. I want to say something more. I'd like to be able to just make a real quick, snap your fingers, there's the argument. But it's more complex in explaining why 100 billion neuron brain is sort of necessary to this process. So you can go back to the biology and you find very complex brains in lots of other organisms. I mean, all the mammals have the same brain as we do. Ours is just a little bit more of certain parts. And you go back to something like a lizard and you find that it's still got a substantial amount of brain, but it's certainly not our brain. And you can see that in the behavior. But the part that's creating the feelings probably goes all the way back to that kind of brain. And then, you can make the argument that it's sort of a necessity to the acquisition of learning is the acquisition of a value creator. The universe intrinsically doesn't have value in it. It doesn't manifest itself as a physical thing. So bodies that are going to be complex navigators of the world have to create value. So they can create positive and negative, so they can reinforce experiential learning. You can't learn if you don't have something inside of you that designates value. And the thing inside of us that does it is what we call these conscious feelings, these sensations that have tied to them a definite aspect of pleasant or unpleasant. Degrees of discomfort is, in my opinion, the more accurate way to describe it. The imposing of discomfort and the releasing, the taking away of impediment and discomfort. And this is the mechanism that ties us to a value system and makes it possible for us to learn from experiences because they either satisfied a need or they didn't. So if you were a crude animal motivated by desires, a sense of need, want, deprivation, you would seek out satisfaction, and if you obtained it through some strategy, the reward would be the gratification you feel in satisfying the need, and that would reinforce the behavior that led to that result. And that's basically the mechanism of positive and negative reinforcement to establish our mood as we navigate the world. And much of it is the creation of a mood, an attitude. That's another essential functional part of consciousness, is the idea that you can have a mood that swings based on what the environment's doing. If the environment's clear and everything's visible, I might be more relaxed than if there's clouds and it's dark and I can't see what's behind the bushes. All these things create an atmosphere inside of the organism that has its correlate, its parallel in the real world, where it's more dangerous or less dangerous, where it's foggier or clearer, and consciousness gears up to those circumstances through the creation of a mood, a tendency to run towards or a tendency to run away, to be in the desire and in the chase, or in the fear and in the retreat. This is the essential function of sentience, of feelings, is to drive us towards and away, and to do it based on a blending of many different circumstances, many different senses. So consciousness, in effect, might be a byproduct of many senses being sensed in one pool of sensation. But we know that it's through neural activity that this takes place, It's not happening in some abstraction. It's not happening, I don't think, in any realistic way. The simplest truth is there'd be no reason to feel if you didn't have a mind capable of nuancing the action to the feeling. If you couldn't in some way have different strategies of reaction possible, there'd be no reason to have feelings. If all you had at your disposal was a knee jerk, then you wouldn't need to create an atmosphere that acknowledged more than one moment in time. That's another part of this, is that it sort of makes us time travelers in a weird way, having consciousness and mood. This mood moves through us over time. It's a collection of not only this moment, but 3 minutes ago, and 5 minutes ago, and even 15 minutes ago. And that's what mood is created as a linear thing. And then when I throw my own memories on top, then it can take me back many years. And then we take our own logical fantasies, we can go forward many years. So our mood can be an expression of a lengthened pile of time. So the knee jerk isn't happening as just a one event in time. It's happening now as a longer process of reaction. So it's not only a deeper sensation of the environment, it's a much deeper capacity to react. And there's just no way microorganisms have the wiring to do that. And there's no reason to believe that that entirely different kind of biological life would have a parallel system to neurology that creates the same theater of reality, the theater that's in our mind, the theater of our life and our experience. That theater needs to be created by complex neurology that has that as its function. And I think we can see that in the human experience. Our behavior isn't that complicated. We only walk, run, feed. We do pretty simple functional behaviors, but we do them in the context of very complex perceptual experience. So we do very simple. I walked here. That's all I did. I just walked. But in that process, I was doing something incredibly complex, many zillions of times more complex than having this conversation. And, there's no evidence of anything like that, any capacity like that inside of minor organisms. You have to have a brain to do that. The brain creates the theater that's having this huge, big adventure while it's doing simple, mechanical things. And it just makes sense. You could just look at your own brain and say, why does it exist? If all I'm going to do is walk and mechanically manipulate a few things, get tired and take a nap. I mean, that doesn't take a huge, giant brain. The reason why we have a huge, giant brain is that it's creating a gigantic context for why I'm doing this simple thing. A huge context. Anyway, it's just a pointless distraction to get lost in these conversations, about irrelevancies of, what microorganisms are experiencing. So waste of our intellectual capital and such. Till next time.